if I'm the
I think
butcher
you
of
should change
Hebrew,
that to the Hebrew butcher. Just sounds better.
I don't know. I mean, I don't have the ethnic grasp of that title that I could really do. Now, in some context, I probably could get away with it, but um, I could change it there just for you, Terry, just for now.
Here we go.
All right, so let's leave like this so we kind of match. Um,
All right. Good morning, Jeff O'Rear. Good to see you this morning. So, we have a show to do.
do we?
Yeah.
All right, just for you, Terry. Just for
Look
you.
what I brought out. Look what I brought out today.
Yeah, he's pulling it out. I think my mug was absconded this morning for one of the coffee drinkers.
My family knows to leave my mugs alone.
Now that rule doesn't really apply in this household. If there's a suitable container available and somebody likes it, there's going to be some missing
Not
mugs for a
here.
bit.
We have respect in my house.
Nah, we respect the cycle of, hey, as long as you use it and clean it, it's fine.
All right, let's jump into it.
All right, so the title on top is What About Teaching for Participation? Terry and I do have some other things that we want to make sure that we focus on. And I want to bring up one right from the beginning. Terry and I both went to school with Dave Cielko, and I don't know how close Terry was to him. I think they were in some of the plays together. I know that Dave did some of that, but I was pretty close to Dave. We spent a lot of time together.
Dave was in my dorm, and I was his dorm monitor. He was actually my next door neighbor.
Right.
So, we were really close.
He's the first person I remember telling me a truth about Phil that has stuck with me. He looked at me. We were having a long conversation. He says, "You know what? You better be careful because I think you're too smart for your own good." I told Jill that recently. She's like, "He's correct."
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Such has never been said about me, by the way.
Dave and his wife are trying their very best to safely move out of the conflict zones in Ukraine. He's been over there for about 10 years. His wife he married his wife over there. And some of you may have seen various updates shared by our various classmates on social media. But I just want to encourage folks to pray for Dave, to pray for our brethren, to pray for the oppressed who would be in the vice of powers beyond their control in any community. And it's something that I think is certainly an easy moment of unification. Like we can all understand that that's something that should be important.
Yeah, Dave and them tried to get out earlier this week and were unable to. They lived in Kyiv for 10 years. One of the things I thought, you probably saw this too, Dave is a tremendous artist. I mean, a very, very good painter. And Dave went through and posted videos on his Facebook page this past week of his art that he's having to leave behind as he tries to escape the country. And a lot of his art, by the way, has religious impact and is a reflection of his faith. And so it's just a very touching story. And our understanding is they're trying to make their way out today. I know of another story of a guy who, oddly enough, I know because he's a Titans fan who's living over there. He took a bus ride, like an 8-hour bus ride the other day to get to the western side of the country. And then it was a 4 to 5 hour walk to Romania from the last stop of where he could get off. Yeah. I just use that to illustrate these people, and estimates are 500,000 refugees already. These folks in Ukraine are doing everything they can to get to safety, but we have brethren who are in that situation. Ukraine, my understanding is, Phil, the Ukraine is probably per capita the most Christian country of all those Eastern Bloc countries.
It's certainly the most open and early open to evangelism in that area. Bill Bynum, back in the 90s, was probably one of the first Americans that you and I might know went there handing out Bibles. They went there.
He married a Ukrainian woman too, correct? His wife is from the Ukraine.
Right. So they handed out. They were intending to hand out like 50 to 100 Bibles. They got like 1,000, 2,000 requests for Bibles in the end.
Right.
And it's near, for those who might be aware, Moldova is a small country where there's a number of Christians. I've taught classes for the brethren there in Moldova, where Sergey works with a couple of churches there, and some other brethren that I know are regularly making trips to both the Ukraine and to Moldova. Moldova is a tiny country on the western edge.
There's some fears that Moldova could be caught up in all of this eventually.
Well, yeah, most certainly if things went poorly. Moldova does not have the might of Ukraine population-wise, military-wise, by any sense. And so they would just be absorbed at that point. They just can't. Ukraine is their defense from Russia's aggressions over the years. Anyway, I don't want to be in the social political space too much.
Let's get into
annoy everybody when I do that.
Let's get into the subject. Speaking of how to teach a class properly, let's do a show with the same kind of principles.
Right. So, Terry, let's talk about, again, the concept of teaching for or in order to gain participation. So
let me say this. Years ago, I heard my buddy David Banning talk about teaching a high school class. He makes a comment, if you've ever heard David Banning teach any of his workshops about teaching a high school class, he'll tell you the problem is that we teach high school classes like we teach the adult class because men are in charge, and that's not even really the right way to teach an adult class. And what he means by that is we tend to lecture, and we tend to get into this class situation and turn it into a lecture. Now, let me say that I know that the response that somebody's going to say from the beginning is going to be, well, I've tried to get participation and that just doesn't work, and nobody will answer questions. And so we have to just lecture. And while I understand there may be some times where that is true, guys, I'm just of the opinion that we end up lecturing because A, it is easier, and B, we don't plan for anything different than that. One of the things that I think is really, my wife is a teacher, and she has a set of standards she has to teach. But one of the things she has to do is she has to go through for every portion of her class, and I see Mark's on here, his wife has to do the same thing, lesson plans for every portion of how she's going to teach that subject. And that's something that years ago we started trying to teach some of our teachers in the children's class. You need to come up with a lesson plan. You need to have plans for the ways you're going to teach this. You don't just go to class and go, oh, today's story is Abraham and Isaac from Genesis 22. I'll just get in there and I'll wing it. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's not how that works, because if you're teaching a kids class and they're a bunch of 5-year-olds, if you do the formula for a 45-minute class, they need 9 activities because they're 5 years old, age into the time, 9 times 5 is 45. They need 9 activities because of their attention rate. That's a general rule. And you got to come up with 9 activities if you're teaching a room full of 5-year-olds. The problem is, as adults, as we look around the room, we're like, hey, everybody's 60. We only have to have 1 activity, and that's going to be me lecturing. And what's the number one complaint everybody has about the adult Bible classes?
No participation.
Lecturing.
Yeah,
no participation.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things I want to bring up maybe, but the first of those is, if you want participation in your class, you've got to make plans to create participation. It will not happen by accident. And I mean specific plans. You've got to do things in a specific way to make sure people will participate. And one of the things that got interesting for us is because of COVID, we started, when we got back, because we were the situation, we had kind of a hybrid model. We had people outside, people inside. For classes for a while, we were doing this live streaming, and we're still live streaming our classes. And Phil is too, but they're handling that different. But for us, we have cordless microphones that we use for class participation. So now when I prepare for a class, and I only have to prepare intentional participation, but I also have to be aware that we're passing mics around. I got mic runners going through the room, right? And which has been something that it's got to be part of your culture if you do that, by the way. People, it's going to take time to get over it, but they do get over it. Mm-hmm. And as a teacher, you're going to have to say, wait till the mic gets there, please. which is part of the culture. But that doesn't mean it would be very easy for us to use that as a reason why we should never, ever, ever just have participation. That's a terrible idea, Phil. It's a terrible idea. However you decide to use it, if you're streaming classes, you need to do something to create participation. So you got to plan for it. You got a lesson plan. You got to have intentional design for how to do this. Let me share with you an example of what I'm talking about. Recently, I was in a class as a student. And the very first time anybody talked besides the opening prayer, from that moment till the first time somebody talked besides the teacher was 23 minutes out of a 45-minute class period. And if you wait till 23 minutes into your class to try to engage your students, you've already lost half of them. That's just a reality. Even a 30-minute sitcom breaks up your attention span with commercials, by the way. Little known fact. So you have to realize that you've got to get people pulled in immediately. You can do that a variety of ways, Phil. My favorite way to do that in the last couple of weeks, and it's been successful, and it may change, is I start class off with some kind of thought question attached to the general principle. And it's not necessarily one of the thought questions in the lesson, although it could be. A couple of weeks ago, I was teaching about heaven, and I wanted to try to illustrate how difficult it would be to really tell us what heaven's like. And I came across an idea from Wright's Every Man series in the section we're at, and I just asked this question: how would you teach the color blue to a blind man?
Yeah.
And that created an amazing amount of discussion, to which then at the end you can say, the reality is you can't teach the color blue to a blind man. No way. And the same is true about trying to explain heaven to us. And then you make this, and after that, we had so much participation. And that's when kind of, for me at least recently, a light bulb kind of came on. You've got to plan something that doesn't not participation that one guy is going to answer a question, but something that's going to create even discussion among the people. You could do that a lot of ways. David Banning's material for high school kids does that a lot of ways. You have agree, disagree questions. You have true, false statements. You have challenge statements. There's a lot of ways to do that in the adult environment. You could do a case, got to plan something that engages your entire audience into some discussion, because that sets the stage for what you need to do. And I think that kind of kicks us off, Phil, with that idea, and you can follow that up.
Right. And so Brian's point here is excellent. And here's the thing with this of a intentional speaking program. Like, this concept is, hey, we're going to do some memorization work. We're going to remember these things. And so each chapter is about this principle. And so we're going to do this as a group together. That gets them actually vocally participating. But the practical application isn't just that they memorized the thing. Like, that's good. The practical application is it normalizes speaking in class. It lowers the barrier. And you can do that in this memorization call response method. You can do it with thought questions. I like it. I just did this Sunday in our discussion on Luke, and I asked the question, why does a ball roll off the table? And the answers are going to vary. Like, this is not a biblical question per se. So I said, well, it rolls off the table because someone rolled it off the table, like somebody hit it. And I said, that's one answer, right? Sometimes the answer is, and so if we went through, like, well, how would a philosopher answer this question? They would say, what is a ball? What would the physicist answer to the question? Potential energy and kinetic energy stored in the ball exceeds that of the, like, okay, what if we asked an astrophysicist? They would say the ball did not fall off the table. It actually flew to the center of mass inside the earth. It actually attracted itself. And so you're going to have these different answers. I said, that's why in the Bible, God will teach things at different levels. It's based on your ability to understand and process a thing. And so God can teach something less clear, more specific, more detailed, exceedingly detailed. And you do that with the idea of drawing out conversation. So each of those different questions I asked about why a ball rolls off the table then generate an opportunity for someone who's less familiar with a different area to now jump in and participate with their expertise and share the table, because that's the goal. The goal is to get to a shared table. So sometimes it's a question, and I'll say this: your questions throughout the course of your class should not be full of incredibly difficult concepts. Some of them need to be and should be simple. And by
Correct.
simple, I mean clear. I mean, the answer is either something they should already know or something you have recently taught. Those things have to be included in the table, as well as some things that require you to kind of grapple around the various concepts a little bit. I think it's super important to give enough fruit that no matter how tall a person is biblically, like how much they've read, how much they've studied, they can still reach it. And so what is low-hanging fruit to one person may be out of reach for another. And it's just really important to make sure your planned questions do that. Part of your lesson planning includes questions that know your audience, and that let them participate.
Here's another participation way to do things that somebody maybe not of this tall level of ability can do. And I noticed this in another class one time, is that the teacher was reading all the texts that were read in the class. I mean, the reality is anybody can read scripture in an adult class, or at least that's our assumption. And so from a standpoint of participation, just to get people used to talking in front of each other, the teacher should never read the scripture.
Right. And there's a balance there. There are times when the teacher, because you're working within the language in a certain way of the sentence as translated into English, you might want to read a little bit.
I don't have that issue because I don't mess with the language. I'm not a Hebrew butcher. I mean, I get it. There's exceptions. But as a general rule, if you're just reading straight text without any commentary, have somebody else do that.
Oh, and by the way, plan those readings in advance. They don't have to know they're going to read, but you have to know that someone's going to read. Like, you've already broken out, like, I need these 4 verses read. And by the way, if your Bible classes, your adult level Bible classes are only covering a verse or half a verse each class,
that's bad lesson planning. I mean, I just hate to say that, but that just shows when somebody sits there and lets it go on for an hour for one, it's just not really good lesson planning.
Right. And Daryl makes a great point. This is where too. Not everybody needs to be the reader.
Well, this is here's again. So one of the side effects of us live streaming and using microphones is that our people that have hearing issues have hearing assist devices that when you use a microphone to read the scriptures, they're actually hearing it in their earphone, in their ear, and it's actually part of the solution. So it allows me a little more freedom in that area that maybe some other people don't have because they don't have a powerful voice. So, and Hal makes this comment, high school, middle school never have trouble getting participation. I expect it because going in from day one, the students know I care about them, build relationships, conversations will follow. Partially, but also partially because when we get ready to teach a high school, middle school class, we want to get them involved because here's one of the issues about that, by the way. As a teacher, I'm not scared of what a high school kid's going to randomly say in class because I think I can handle it because I'm older than them. Hey, look, there's some fear sometimes that open that floor up in the adult class, by the way. Now I will add a caveat. If my daughter or Phil's daughter's in the high school class, you might want to be concerned about what they might say. But in regards to a typical situation, we encourage more participation. We know the high school kids need to. When it comes to adult class, we're kind of like, I don't know that they really, really want to. You got to create that. You got to create that.
But again, even with our daughters, as an example, you've got to make them feel comfortable to participate. Like you can shut them down before you begin. Further, I'll add this. Realize this about everybody. Everyone who shows up to worship, to go to a Bible class, to the varying degree of their zeal, wants to be there. If you don't leverage their want to be there to make them want to be there next time, then you're missing out on what they can provide to the class, because they provide themselves. They provide all their experiences, even if they're 15, even if they're 12, even if they're 10. they provide themselves, and who they are is important, and it matters. And so we talk about, like, I'm not afraid of the questions because they're probably not going to ask a question I haven't heard before. But that doesn't mean that's not the case. And like sometimes, like, they do ask questions that they've never heard ever before. Ask the question. Let's move forward. Um, you know, and Hal talks about another challenge. We can talk about that too. Here, maybe just a second about the challenge of getting kids to participate in class and get them to be there. I'll just tell you on a side note, a lot of times I just go to the kid directly, say, "Hey, man, I would love for you to be here. This is what we're doing. It's super exciting, and you can help us." Like depending on the kid,
here's the other side of that. If you're going to tell the kid it's super exciting, you better make sure whoever the teacher is making it super exciting. Like, I think one of the problems we have sometimes with our kids' classes is sometimes we're just glad to put anybody with a pulse in the kids' class to teach. And historically, not saying this about where Hal's at, I don't know. I'm just saying historically in churches that I am associated with, we've done a terrible job training our teachers historically. And we're so short on teachers, and COVID made that harder, that we've lost some, at least most places have lost a percentage of their workforce for various reasons. And because of that, we're just happy to have somebody with a pulse in the classroom sometimes. And we've got to do better than that. It's on the kids, but it's on the teachers. As you said, Phil, earlier, you got to give that kid a reason to come back to class. You got to give that adult a reason to come back to class. You got to teach in a way that's engaging. That's what you got to do.
If you make the student feel small because they didn't know the answer to the question you asked because of the reasons that are all over the space, that's on you. Like, that's not on the kid who maybe wasn't encouraged to do his work at home. Maybe their home life is a mess. Maybe they're dealing with a lot of emotional, social, societal pressures outside of this. Maybe everything's awful. And your job in teaching that class is to tell them that it can be awful, but it can be good. It can be awful right now, but it's going to be good. And sometimes the issues that they're not comfortable with have nothing to do with the teacher or the subject. Sometimes there's interpersonal relationships in the students that you've got to help them sort through. All those things are real, normal teaching space issues. And Paul's right. We don't historically, amongst the churches that Terry and I are aware of, and I think he would agree to this, put sufficient effort on developing the best teachers. I just don't think that's something that we do to the degree that we could. It's part of the Walmart versus Dollar General world in which we live, which is a callback to a conversation about 2 years ago.
Well, and it comes back to, in a perfect world, you mentor teachers, but the problem is sometimes you don't have enough teachers to pair up to mentor teachers. And I get it. I would suggest to churches that are in that case, you'd be better off to combine some age groups to let teachers mentor than you would to put somebody with no experience and no qualifications in to teach a class just to maintain the classes that you have. And I think that's an important point. And Paul, to your point about we don't feel qualified to train teachers, there are people that will come do that for you.
Right.
They're not as many as there should be. But the other part of that is the material out there to learn how to teach people how to teach is out there. There's resources out there that have great input on how to teach classes correctly.
Look, here's a counterculture response. You live near, wherever you live in the United States, a bucket load of qualified teachers for every grade level.
Yeah.
They happen to work as teachers.
Yeah.
Go to your kids' teachers who are the best teachers in the school and have a half-hour conversation with them. Guess what they're going to help you do? Learn to teach that age bracket better. Okay, you were the best teacher at the school last year. Guess who I'm going to go talk to? Well, they're not members of the church. They may or may not be. It doesn't matter. They're qualified, competent teachers.
But it's even easier than that. I got to just be honest with you. Learning the tricks of teaching a good Bible class that is not difficult. It is not really that hard. There are some simple things you can do that will automatically make you a better teacher. One of those I mentioned earlier, which is understanding the attention rate span of your class and how many activities to have. And if you just take the average age of the class, divide it into the number of minutes you have, that will tell you how many activities you have to have. So if you're teaching the high school class and it's 15 is the average age, you have a 45-minute class, you better have three different three different activities about that. If you Kramer, I'll get to that in a minute. If you have 5-year-olds, it's 5 and 45 minutes, it's 9 activities. That simple thing is revolutionary for your class. And you have to think in those regards. And by the way, the pigs material, I don't know who wrote that. I'm not teaching that class. I'm in that class. It's based off of Kyle Idleman's book, Aha, which is based off of the story of the prodigal son. So there you go. It's waking up with the pigs, guys, is what the book is called. It's about being in the pig pen moment and dealing with coming to your knowledge of your senses of your sin. That's for a quick rundown.
Right. So I would argue that you should be kind of looking into. I got a question. Answers this question. The Lexham Geographic Comic Series on the commentary series on the Gospels actually has like 4 different chapters on the economy of the pig market in Israel during the Second Temple period. So there's like 4 chapters on it. I'll actually throw a link. It's an awesome section in that commentary. I was like, what is the world's all about? It's cool. So I went a whole different direction. I got excited when he asked about learning or teaching about pigs.
By the way, if this is your title, great cover. Great cover. Just going to say. Wonder who did that.
Yeah, I wonder.
Some
butcher from the South.
Some southern butcher.
Southern
butcher.
Yeah.
Yep.
So listen, look, here's some keys that I always try. Your class has to have a plan. The plan includes appreciable specific goals for the class. The plan needs to have a schedule, a time-based schedule. Yeah. Harry talks about activity space for the age of the class. Totally same thing. Look, if you're adult class at age 30 and you got a 45-minute class, somewhere in the middle of that, you got to change things up. And you got to change things up in a way that helps the class continue to go forward. Right. So you got to have a schedule with your plan and then stick to those.
Talk about a plan. Here's an interesting thing. There's this kind of movement out there that says, hey, we're not going to have a curriculum. We're just going to read through the text and we're going to get to where we get to. That's how you stay in Acts for 4 years, by the way. Okay? Because you have no plan. You, as the teacher, can have no book, but you still need to have a plan. You need to know what you're covering this week. Okay, you need to cover a certain amount of text. You need a start point and an ending point. You've got to have those 2 things for every class you make. And if you can't tell me here's the verse we're starting at, here's the verse we're ending at, that tells me you don't have a plan. You don't have a plan for how this class is going to go because you've not even planned the beginning and the end. And Paul's right. Changing it up is not stopping long enough to go. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments about this passage? That's not changing it up at all. That's actually saying, I'm going to say this. Nobody's going to do anything. Let's get back to my lecture.
Unless you've normalized it. If you've normalized that kind of interaction and you've made that be, hey, this is something that we do and you should be comfortable with it, that's fine.
Yeah. BJ brings up small groups. I do that all the time in my adult class. It is harder to do in an adult class if you're in an auditorium like we are because people don't want to get up and move. So the way I do small groups is I kind of if I give them a group, I assign that itself. If I don't do it as a small group, then what I do is I'll say, hey, just turn and talk to your neighbors. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then we'll discuss what you guys came up with. But it's a great thing to do and do that. And Kramer asked about classes staying the same material and same schedule. It's a great idea. I don't think it's necessary, but it's always a great idea. It helps promote study at home, which I think is a good thing. That's just up to the local congregation.
Right. One variation on that I've heard that I think really works well in a particular church is the material is a quarter, a session delayed. So the adult class studies at first, and then the middle school or the high school class studies at second, and then the middle school studies at third, the teacher who teaches that adult class will then also teach the high school and the middle school. So by the time they're teaching the middle school the material, this is their third time teaching it, and so that it improves. You would expect as you go up in difficulty of audience and what you want them to be able to participate in. I think that's, if you're going to do something like that and have that level of structure, that can be good. It also kind of allows you to have the high school teachers have a rotation of people who just learned it in the adult class. And so you can kind of.
Yeah. What we did last time when I taught Revelation, I taught to the adults. And then I went and taught the high school, middle school combined with Revelation. But I took one of the students from the adult class as a co-teacher with me. And that is a way to mentor new teachers. He just went through it as a student. Now he goes in as a co-teacher. So he already has the information. I'm going to kick us off, and every so often I'm going to say, you're going to teach this week. And I'll be right there with him holding his hand, but he's going to teach this week. Really important.
And Mark probably can answer this. We might have him come in at some point. Mark has talked before to me about how much his wife's profession has helped him as a preacher and a teacher. She's an educator. And so I think there's some value there, because look, that's how it's supposed to be. That's why I recommend it. Go find people who teach the age that you're trying to teach. Like, go find coaches that are good coaches. Go find teachers that are good teachers. Go sit and listen to not what they're teaching, but how they're teaching it. And like you do with anything else, chew it up, spit out the bones. Some of what they say and do won't work for you. For years, I have applied a principle that I learned from a friend of mine, James Yeager, who teaches an entirely different world space, that he plans to teach, but never plans to teach all that he knows about a subject. He says, if I teach everything I know, it's too much for the time spans. And so he always keeps some back. He's like, okay, how deep do I need to go? I don't need to go to everything I know about it. I'll pull it up a little bit, because you have that balance. And I've been doing that for 15, 20 years now. So there's
by the way, there's a book that really helped me out by Howard Hendricks called Teaching to Change Lives. I'd recommend that book. I think it's powerful because it focuses on why you teach, how you teach. He tells a story in there, and this touches down on the other thing. I think sometimes we become lazy teachers, Phil. I know in the past I have, and I've just kind of rested on, I can get up this, because if I'm in middle school, I'm above them. I really prepare for this class. I could go in blind and teach this on a level that's better where they're at. And he tells a story of walking one night past one of his professor's house. It was late at night, and he saw his professor studying still through the window. And he asked him why that was, because he was an older man. He obviously knew more than any of the students. And the professor said he would, and I'm going to butcher this quote directly, but it was essentially, he would rather have his students drink from a rushing stream than a stagnant pool. And I think there's a point to that, by the way, that part of this is, regardless of how familiar you are with the text, you've got to always be studying. Yeah. You've got to always be studying, because you will find things along the way that will actually improve your knowledge and understanding and help improve your students' knowledge. I think sometimes we think we're on the meat and we don't need to progress to tougher meat. We just, we're not milk. We're okay. We're done. And that doesn't work either. You got to put effort into this. And that's really the whole point of this, is you've got to put effort into this. You've got to actually work if you're going to be a teacher. That's a lot to ask somebody who's holding down a full-time job. I get that, and has a family, but anything worth doing is worth doing well. And this is one of those things where this has a powerful impact on who we are as God's people and how we teach. I think some of our greatest growth comes in our Bible classes, not in our sermons, but in our Bible classes. I think that's important.
Yeah. And Brian connects a concept that's difficult to apply consistently, that what you're trying to do is engender a relationship and conversation at home amongst these families who are digging into their local works. They might be teachers, they might be students, they might be adults serving in different capacities. A side note, the one that you can do is, and I do this in the sermon sometime, is I will include in part of the sermon a lunch table discussion comment. Like, hey, that'd be a good thing to talk about today at lunch. and straight up written right in there. And it's usually coming off of the context of the sermon or the context of the application of the sermon in life. So these help intertwine these principles in a way that make them, again, sticky. You want them to stick. You want them to not just enjoy the class, but learn from the class and then apply the message. So like you're trying to get all these things to happen in even if you say 45 minutes, it's probably more like 40-minute sessions a week. And so again, you can't cover too much, but you got to cover it in a way that it sticks to them. And building these systems in place is going to make your job not only easier in some areas because the plan is there, but ultimately more effective if you do that work.
But by the way, most of your kids' curriculums that are out there that are well known today all have, if you're following it like from us up to 6th grades, all the same schedule. Almost all of those have daily Bible reading assignments for parents. Yeah. Most of these curriculums are equipping the parents for at-home stuff, and I'm not saying Brian's idea is not good. It is. Part of that is we just need to remind our parents, hey, this stuff is here. You need to use it. Like that. That's the hard sell.
Right.
Just, to recap, closing things here is you just really need to, if anything could change the way you teach today, it is actually developing a lesson plan for what you're going to do in that amount of time. It's actually sitting down and saying, here is how I'm going to teach this material. Here's what I'm going to do the first 10 minutes. Here's what I'm going to do the next 15 minutes. Here's what I'm going to do the next 10 minutes. I mean, it is literally, that's the way you have to prepare to teach a good class. That's what my wife does. That's what Mark's wife, Cindy, does. And that's what we should do. And that's the main thing. I like Kramer's thing. Some of you may know, we talked about recently, we're doing once a month. We just stay right after church and some of us discuss, and there is some impact to that.
Basically, you just listen to your daughter's comments and complaints about your own preaching in those sessions, right? Is that what that is now?
No, my daughter in the last, she actually spoke up in the last public question and answer after our worship and had a great question, as Hallie would, because our girls are very smart. You are blessed with a smart son. I'm just blessed with smart daughters.
Payne's going to surprise you at some point in the future. His emotional smarts are going to come in.
We're hoping so, man. We're holding out against hope, but I say that he's in class right now. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm still Team Peyton. Forevermore. Hey, everybody. Thank you.
Hallie on the table. We can.
Hallie would kill Peyton. He would die.
Yeah,
straight up.
He's been trained well. He's got Jillian. Hey, as we close, let's remember our brother in Ukraine. Specifically, would like to remind you of David Siolkos, who's a great guy. If you were around FC back in the early 90s, if you ever saw a guy with a hooded mask flipping across the gym floor during a basketball game, that's David Siolkos. In fact, his gymnastics abilities is what took him to the Ukraine to begin with. Just a great guy, and certainly hope him and Marina can get to safety, hopefully today.
If there's something we can do in helping you work and encourage you evangelistically, spiritually, or just handling the load that preachers carry on their shoulders, we're happy to help in the ways that we can. And may God bless you in your work. You guys take care.